Alright, we'll give up waiting for them and just get started. Let's quickly recap where we're at in our story. So where did we finish off? What do you remember from where we just finished? We finished a really great guy. One of the big names you should know from early Roman history. The dictator slash farmer. City named after him, Cincinnatus. So we did Cincinnatus and his dictatorship. You remember that? They beat the Aequi at their camp. Go ahead. His son, Queso's trial. So his son's Queso's trial got Queso kicked out of the city, ultimately killed, and it's what left Cincinnatus bankrupt because his son was let out on bail, and Cincinnatus had to pay the bail, and so that's what left him broke. And then we ended with, at the end of his dictatorship, it turns out his son was falsely charged. And the guy who brought charges against him had essentially made up the story. And so it ended with, his dictatorship ended with him basically just staying a dictator while the quaestors brought the trial against the guy who kind of framed Queso. And so simply so that the tribunes couldn't veto the quaestors bringing the trial. That's why they need to keep a dictator in power just until the trial went forward. Anyway, so after his dictatorship, things in Rome fall back to business as usual. And what's business as usual for Rome at this time? Tribunes and plebs and patricians going at it, particularly tribunes and magistrates going at it. The patricians who have state power and the plebs who have state power. Your tribunes and your magistrates. And so, going forward now, what ends up happening is, once again, the Aequi, the Volsci, the Sabines, they come invading Roman territory. Once again, the Romans need to levy an army. And once again, the tribunes start vetoing the levy, stopping them from raising the troops again. And so, the first compromise, this is kind of covering a bunch of time all in one go, but so the first time that the consuls need to hurry up and levy an army, the tribunes, blocking them from levying the army, they say, we'll let you levy the army if you enable us to increase from 5 to 10 tribunes. And the consuls agree, the patricians agree, with one exception. What do the tribunes keep doing over and over again that's driving the patricians crazy? Re-electing the exact same people, which is against the law. You can't re-elect the same people. So they say, fine, we'll let you double the tribunes from 5 to 10. Just stop re-electing the same people. They say, agreed. Elections come around, they elect 10 tribunes rather than 5, and 5 of them are the exact same tribunes that they had before. On their third, fourth term, whatever it is now.
What was the advantage to having 10 tribunes versus 5?
So remember that the tribunes basically have the power of the assembly in one person to say no. And they can only operate this power inside the Roman limits, but they have that power. And so the more of them there are, the more places they can be in the city, the more actions they can block. So it's an actual physical person out there blocking the actions, and they also get their little beetle to enforce their will. And so the more of them that group together, the more policing force they also have. So it's also doubling the policing force that the tribunes have to enforce their will. Anyways, so that's what's going on. The Romans are able to levy the armies. What they need to levy the army for really quick was dealing with the attack on Tusculum. Now remember, Tusculum now has a special place in Rome's heart. Because what did Tusculum do? Yeah, when the slaves took the citadel in the center of Rome, Tusculum raised their army and booked it to Rome faster than Rome could raise their own army. And helped them hurry up and retake their citadel. So it was a tax on Tusculum in particular that they need to hurry up and levy the troops for to go deal with. So they deal with the attack on Tusculum, whoever was attacking them, the Aequi or the Volsci, whoever it was, I don't know. And the year prior to this, there was a famine in Rome. And when there's famine in Rome, what does Rome have to do? They use the city funds, they use state funds, to go and buy as much wheat as they can, and then sell it to the people at a discounted price. So they're basically subsidizing food purchases for the people en masse. And so it's very expensive for the state when Rome has famine. So the year prior to them sending out the armies here, Rome had a famine. And so the state treasury is low. So they levy the troops, they go out, they deal with whatever army was attacking Tusculum, and they get the enemy's camp. And the enemy's camp is where you get all your plunder from. And so they plunder the enemy's camp. What the soldiers decide to, or what the consuls, the generals leading the army, decide to do this year is take that plunder and sell it to refill the state treasury with all the money that they just lost. Now, soldiers absolutely hate when you do this, because a soldier isn't paid for going out and being a soldier. That booty that they get from the enemy camp is largely their pay for being a soldier. That's the benefit they typically get by going out and fighting. And so it's like all their pay for being a soldier was suddenly taken by the state as a tax. And it's just the soldiers who happened to go on that campaign that were taxed to pay for all this food that everyone got. So it's kind of like an unfair tax, but it's really the only way Rome has to refill her treasury, is take it from other people. Since there isn't really much of a system of tax on the people. The tax on the people is typically just forcing them to do their military service. So, kind of a bad situation. Patricians got to do what they got to do, plebs have to pay, but it's kind of unfair, but it is what it is. Anyways, plebeians are angry, and remember that the tribunes here are still always trying to get laws passed to favor the plebs. So we talked about the agrarian law. That still has never died. And tribunes are constantly bringing up and trying to push through the agrarian law as an example. So there's these past laws that are constantly coming up that the consuls keep on blocking, preventing from getting passed over and over again. And so with the plebs angry, remember that it's the assembly that ultimately has right of appeal, and it's the assembly who decides capital cases. If the people as a whole are angry at the patricians, you can start bringing angry not just at the patricians, but the magistrates, like the consuls, your aediles, your quaestors, whatever. You can start bringing charges against them, and if the mob's on your side, they'll be found guilty. And so with the mob angry, with the plebeians angry, tribunes can now start bringing trials against consuls. Once the consuls leave term, just bring whatever charges against them, as long as it's a capital charge you're bringing against them. And if the plebs are angry enough, then you'll be able to find them guilty. And so that's what they're going to start doing. As soon as those consuls, who are the ones who did this, who used the war booty to refill the state treasury, are out of office, the tribunes bring charges against them, basically accusing them of grossly neglecting their responsibility to the state, almost treasons, kind of like what we would typically think about impeaching someone for now. So it's usually very high crimes that should qualify as these types of charges. And what ends up happening is the mob, angry at them, agrees that they're guilty. Now typically they usually just give them a slap on the wrist and give them some fine. Largely the point is to humiliate them for ever going against any of the legislation the tribune tried to push forward. Sometimes it came to exiling whoever it was, and we saw way back in the past how it led to actually killing some, but in this case right now, they're not going that far. But so now, once again, tribunes are coming after Roman magistrates who oppose their laws once those Roman magistrates leave office. Does that make sense? So things are back to boiling over again. And so the patricians got to do something to calm the people down. Now, one of the main things that the people are still pushing for is the Lex Terentilia. This is the law that puts in writing everything that a consul can and cannot do. All the consular powers. Now the problem that the patricians have with this is already the whole point of a tribune is if a consul is abusing his power, you already get to veto it. You can already decide whenever we're crossing the line. But since what a consul has to do is kind of vague, we can't put specific powers, we can't put specific limitations on what already is a vague responsibility. There's just no good way to do this. And so it's just going to be more ways of tying the consul's hands, so they're absolutely opposed to that. And so what ends up coming up as another proposed piece of legislation, the Lex Aecilia, some other guy proposing a law, that is a law that designates the Aventine Hill for the plebeians. So one of the 7 hills will be a hill special for the plebeians. No patricians allowed. And so the patricians are going to jump on board with this bill. They'll say, okay, we'll give you this as long as we look away from this. We're much happier to give you a hill, one of the 7 hills, and let that be yours inside Rome, than we are to put in writing what exactly the consular powers are. And so they think that this is a good distraction to pacify the plebs and keep them happy for a while, calm things down. So they go ahead and they pass that law. Plebs still aren't happy. Tribunes are still blocking the levy. And so they're still pushing, they want this law. So patricians, tribunes come up with a compromise in 454 BC. Here's what their compromise is. They say to the patricians, okay, you're saying that you don't want this law because you need kind of vague powers to deal with vague situations. What they suggest is what's called, rather than the lex terentilia, what they propose is having all laws written down and then displayed in the forum so that everyone can see what the laws are. And that way you don't need vague powers for dealing with vague responsibilities because we're making it very definite what is and isn't allowed. And so now a consul doesn't have to have the powers to decide. And the patricians like this much more. They say, fine, you want to write down all the laws, that's something that we can get on board with, as long as the people writing down the laws are patricians. So you can select which of us you want to be the ones to write down the laws, as long as it's actual patricians writing down the laws. We don't want plebeians suddenly putting what the consuls can and cannot do, all these red tape around the consular powers. That's mostly what they're afraid of. So that is the great compromise that they come to. And so they agree that what they're going to ultimately do is appoint 10 men who will be the ones to put in writing all Roman law and display it right there in the forum so that everyone can read it.
This includes the laws for the tribunes, right?
This includes, laws over everything. Give you an example of one of the laws that are going to come out of this. One of the laws that are going to come out of this is if the fruit falls on your neighbor's property, it's your neighbor's fruit. If the fruit falls out of your apple tree on the neighbor's property, it's now your neighbor's apple. Another example of a law that's in here is you can charge at most 100% interest. Remember how there was a problem with the interest rates before? So that's one of the laws that are going to be passed in these. It's going to be ultimately lead to the 12 tables of Roman law. So those are the type of laws that are going to be in here. Stuff that governs very day-to-day life activities. And we don't need some consul now to be the one to decide, is this allowed, is this not allowed? Because up till now, there isn't written down Roman law. They kind of just agree upon the laws, and you kind of know it's a law just because everyone says it is. And that's why I kept stressing that there's not a big difference between precedents and law. What we do just because it's what we do, and what we do because it's the actual law, and someone passed a law somewhere in the past that says that's what we do. And so early on, those are very meshed together, and no one has a clear idea of what exactly is what. So that's what the big compromise is to do. So, I already said that. Patricians agree so long as the 10 men are patricians. The plebs are okay with this as long as no past tribunal laws get repealed. In other words, they just got the Aventine Hill. We can't take it back as part of these laws. Or if you remember, one of the things that they were worried about with Cincinnatus, clear back during his consulship, is that he was going to take the army out of the city, go set up some voting grounds, and repeal all the laws that the tribunes had passed using violence. That's what they were terrified he was going to do. So they don't want anything like that to even be remotely possible. The laws we got, we get to keep. And so those are the two things agreed to. So with that, how are we going to figure out what these laws are even going to be? What they decide to do first is we'll continue with the year as normal, and we're going to send 3 men to Athens over in Greece to study the famous laws put forth by Solon. Solon, one of the, I think it's 7 wise men of the ancient world. Yeah. And he's the one who's essentially credited with setting up the democracy at Athens. Because Athens had, I don't know how far past, 100 years ago in the past or so, around 500 BC, so maybe more like 50 years in the past, they had set up their own. They had gone through a situation very similar to what Rome's currently going through. They had also had a problem where their elites had come to own way too much land, and you had the masses, the poor masses, becoming very disgruntled with the way the city-state was going. And Solon came in, he rebalanced the powers around to make everyone kind of happy, and then Athens was able to go forward, and Athens becomes a great city-state that it becomes. But on top of that, not only do they get familiar with Athens, but they get familiar with just Greek government styles in general. So they're going to go study a bunch of different Greek constitutions, a bunch of different ways people are doing things. Spartans have a pretty famous constitution. We spent a good amount of time on that in philosophy, and why it was such a stable constitution. So just studying different governments. Go learn what you can, come back, and then we'll put forward these 10 people, and we'll have them write down the Roman laws. So that's their big plan, and trying to reset up the picture for why that's their big plan. Any questions before we move forward? All right, so moving forward. So what they're going to set up is called the Decemviri, the Council of 10 Men. That's where the death comes from in the Decemviri. Now, these 10 men have to have the powers to by themselves pretty much pass laws. So there can't be any appeal against these 10 men. So what Rome is going to do is they're pretty much going to put the government in just 10 men's hands for the next year and let them decide what the laws are going to be. So consuls, quaestors, judges, tribunes, all those positions are suspended. No one's going to be elected to those positions. Instead, we're just going to have 10 men appointed with all the consular powers and with no appeal against their decisions. So they have the consular powers, the tribune powers, the power of judges, all the powers are vested in these 10 men. It's almost like 10 mini kings, all cycling through all the power of the state. The way it works in practice is, so we have these 10 men, no appeal from their decisions, but what's going to end up happening in practice is if you have a court problem while these 10 men are in power, you're going to bring it up to one of the 10 men. If you have a problem with his judgment, you can kind of appeal the case to any of the other 10 men. And so that's going to be the way that appeals work in principle. So even though there is no appeal from one of their decisions, another one of them can talk one of them into changing their mind, so to speak. Another thing they're going to be charged with is writing the laws, but at the same time running the state, dealing with all the day-to-day affairs, since all the powers of the state have to be vested in just these guys. Now, Appius Claudius, not any of the two Appius Claudiuses or three that we've talked about before. This is now a completely new guy. Appius Claudius, but you can almost always think about him as the same guy. This time, this Appius Claudius is very popular amongst the people, very much loved by the people. So he ran for election, he got the most votes, and he's kind of seen as a de facto leader of the Decemvirate. Very popular guy. Now, what they decide to do is they're going to cycle through fasces once a day. Well, say this better. So there's 10 Decemvirates. One of them gets 12 lictors. The other 9 each just have a beetle. Single beetle, like the tribunes did. The one who has the 12 lictors, he holds fasces. And every day, that alternates. So it's like one guy rules for a day, 10 days later, he's going to be back in power as the one who's kind of holding fasces. And so that's how it's going to alternate with the powers. So even though there's 10 of them, only one is really holding the power at the time. And these 10 guys, while they are in power, they do an absolutely immaculate job. Everyone absolutely loves these guys. They're being very efficient in how they're running the state. Everyone feels like they're getting justice. They're doing a good job making sure that both the patricians and the plebs feel like they're being taken care of. And on top of that, they got to work and they drew up 10 tables of laws. Now, even though they could just force these laws through, they don't want to. They want to make sure that the general public agrees with the laws. They're sincerely trying, to the best of their ability, to come up with a good set of laws for Rome to be governed by. So once they drop their 10 tables, they distribute them to the public for all their consideration, trying to get feedback on what people feel like needs changed, what they like, what they don't like. So, sincerely trying to do a good job and modifying it as they go. Everyone loves these guys. Fantastic. The year goes on as all these things are being decided. Everyone kind of likes the 10 tables, and they feel like the laws that they have written on those 10 tables are good. But there's this feeling that there's still all these other laws that should be written down that they missed. And so the general feeling is we need about 2 more tables of Roman law before we can continue and be done with the Decemvirs. And so, if we need 2 more tables, what do we need to do?
2 more guys.
We need to extend, we need 10 new Decemviri to now be elected. So at the next elections, it's going to be a bunch of people trying to run to become the Decemviri. So it's presented to the people and to the Senate that we're most likely going to need to have 10 more Decemviri. So the Senate say that there's a specific date that they appoint that we will vote for the Decemviri. And so once again, there will be another year that we don't elect consuls or tribunes. And we're just going to have 10 Decemviri again for a second year. Now, for most of the people in the Decemviri, there's no real concern over. Most of them were older men who were just kind of sought out for their wisdom. Appius Claudius got the position by winning over the crowd. He's the popular one. He's the only young one on the council. He's the one that the people love. And so the rest of the Decemviri and the Roman Senate are kind of becoming concerned as to how popular this guy's becoming. And it's got that vibe of trying to set himself up as a king vibe going on. And so the Decemviri, in order to stop Appius Claudius from running for Decemviri again, which you don't do, right? You don't run for an office right after you leave the office. That's no. What they do is they have him oversee the elections of the next Decemviri. Because remember, what the law technically is you can't run for election in an election that you're overseeing. Or at least that's the rule. Shouldn't say it's the law. That's the precedent that everyone's supposed to follow. And so, to stop him from running as a Decemviri in the upcoming year, the other 9 Decemviri decide to select him as one to oversee the elections. Now, he's tickled pink. He loves this idea. He absolutely runs. The people love him. He gets himself elected. And now, he's the one overseeing the elections. And so he rigs the elections to make sure that no one but his pals are the next 9 Decemviri. And so now Appius Claudius, with his 9 thugs, are now given all the powers of the state. And this Appius Claudius guy starts acting like the other Appius Claudiuses you know from the past. Told you they're all the same guy. He just keeps getting reincarnated. So now, 10 Decemviris, Appius Claudius, and all his guys. Now, after the election happens, Rome has a time frame between elections and when you technically come to power. So the elections happen, and I'm not sure how much time goes by, but it's like a month or 2, before they actually come to power. And all the Decemviri who were elected kind of disappear from the public eye, and they start just meeting with each other on a daily basis, getting ready for when they come to power. When they do finally come to power and present themselves to the Roman Forum, all 10 of them come, each of them having 12 lictors with them, each of them holding fasces, and each of them having the axe with their fasces. Now you remember, the axe you only hold when you're dictator. And it's to remind the people that there's no appeal from you, and so they have power over life and death. There's no appeal from the Decemviri, so Appius Claudius says, since there's no appeal from us, this isn't abusing our powers to stand like a dictator. And so now Rome, in practice, has 10 dictators, except for no 6-month appointment. Yeah, so things changed very drastically. And now the plebs are, oh, go ahead.
Do you know why they did that? Like
How they can?
is it just powers or like trying to get
12 lictors.
I'm not understanding the question.
It's like a flag.
like what are they trying to accomplish by doing that? Like what's the
Get power.
okay.
That's it. They're taking control of the state. It was basically just dropped in Appius Claudius' hands. He can't believe his luck.
Okay.
Tried to get rid of the guy and got 10 more.
Yeah.
But if he's setting himself up as a king, supposedly, wouldn't that give them the right to kill him immediately?
Yeah.
Well, is he setting himself up as a king?
As a dictator without...
Or is he just one of 10 dictators holding out the position that he was elected for, using the powers that they gave him? There's no appeal against him. That's what the axe means.
And the 10 big dictators are all his buddies. I don't know.
The other 9 are all his buddies now, all elected by the people as Decemviri. Before, it was older, more conservative men, and they decided amongst themselves to handle fasces the way that they handled it, trying to be very modest. Him and his pals have no desire to be modest. They're going to enjoy this. And now, what has been going on prior to these guys, the Decemviri, coming along? There has been a bitter struggle between the patricians and the plebeians. And now the patricians, in particular, these 10 Decemviri, have all the power. And so now they are just going to take it out on these poor plebs. So it is going to be absolutely tyrannical rule. What these Decemviris decided ahead of time is we're all going to hold fasces. And on top of that, we're not going to allow anyone to come to us to appeal another one of our decisions. In other words, we're all going to leave each other alone. So if me and Bob are both Decemviris, and you go to Bob with some court case, and he decides, well, actually, I'm going to fine you everything you have, and you come to me and you say, that's not fair, I'm going to say, not only are you going to pay the fine, but I'm going to beat you first. So we're just going to enforce whatever the other person does, and then some. Make anyone regret trying to go to another one of us to try and get justice. None of us are going to mess with each other, and we're all going to just do whatever we want. So, that's the way that they're going to do this. Now, they are going to focus on all their abuses, largely on just the plebeians. They're not really going to pick on the patricians, or kind of going to just leave the patricians alone. Now, what they're going to do is, remember that the Senate can't just meet. The Senate has to be called together. So they're going to stop calling any sort of meetings at all, and they're just going to make all the decisions themselves. So the senators, if you're a patrician, if you're a senator, you're largely being left alone. Most of the senators kind of just end up leaving the city and going to their private little farms wherever they are and just continuing with their day-to-day lives, as though nothing's really happening. The Decemviri know, as long as we leave the patricians alone, it will at least be a while before they bother trying to come after us. And the plebeians, they can never really get ahead someone to lead them. Anytime the plebeians need someone to lead them, they turn to the patricians to lead them. So if we leave the patricians alone, the plebs can't turn to them. And so we can take it all out on the plebs. And they use the basic tactics of anytime you go too far, you know, you kill someone that might make the crowd angry. What do? You distribute his wealth to the crowd. Make everyone somewhat participate in your crimes so that everyone, even though they don't like it, it's nice getting that new car. Sorry, Bob had to die. So that's the way rule is going on in Rome, with the senators largely just going about their private business. So no assemblies are put together. That's including the Senate. And what that means is when it comes time for elections, no assemblies are called together. And so the second year goes by, and nothing happens, and the 10 Decemviri are still in power. Go ahead.
Have they passed the next 2 tablets of law yet?
No. They did write 2 more tablets of law, but they have not passed the other 2 tablets yet. So only 10 so far are passed. But they did bother writing them down, so they weren't completely neglecting their jobs. They were just enjoying it as they went, I guess. Now, again, Rome doesn't exist in a vacuum. Rome's enemies are very aware of what's going on in Rome. They're loving this. Rome is completely split. These guys are inflicting themselves like this on the plebeian masses. Great time to go attack, plunder the land, get what we want. So Rome's enemies, that's exactly what they do. Particularly the Sabines and the Aequi, they come into the Roman lands and they start looting and plundering. Well, now that Decemviri's in trouble, what are we going to do? We have to levy the army. Now, you might remember the last Appius Claudius, who tried leading an army that despised him, and how that worked out for him.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to lead an army that despises you. They're going to let themselves be defeated. So the Decemviri can't just levy the troops and go out and fight. They need someone to lead the troops that the troops will get behind, but that will also kind of be okay with what the Decemviri's doing. And so who's the only one that can kind of fill that position? Some other patricians. So what they do is, for the first time in over a year, they call a meeting of the Senate. Now, they call the meeting of the Senate, and initially, no one shows up.
How is that possible?
How's what possible?
Okay, you're telling me the Decemviri just took power over Rome, and the Senate and all of the patricians just kind of like went to their farms and didn't care?
The majority of them just went to their private lives.
And when they're called, they're like, no, that's ridiculous.
So when they're called, it was kind of like no. But first off, the plebeians were really happy that was like no. The plebeians were rationalizing, Rome is recognizing that these are just private citizens. Our patricians are recognizing that these are just private citizens and don't have any right to call the Senate together. And so if the patricians are refusing to go to the Senate, that's them telling us that we should refuse to be levied. That's how the patricians are reading the situation. What really ended up happening is no senators are in the city, and so no one showed up. And the Decemviri had no clue that everyone kind of just left. And so then they take the time to go and send the messages to all their different farms all scattered throughout the land, everywhere that they are. And then the Senate decides to actually show up. And the Decemviri shocked with actually how much of them do show up. But the Decemviri knows that the Senate's not going to be very happy about it. And so when they do show up and they start talking, the Senate pretty much states exactly what the public is thinking. They say, you are private citizens, you have no right to call us to power, you were elected to your one-year term which has expired, your job is to put forth elections for other consuls. And a bunch of the friends and family members of the Decemviri try and talk them into giving up the power of their own free will. The senators are also being a little bit petty here. While they don't like the Decemviri, they kind of like that the plebs are getting what they asked for. So they're kind of twisted in both ways. They don't like the Decemviri, but they don't like the plebs. And they love seeing the plebs getting punished. And they're kind of scheming, trying to find a way. They're trying to talk to the Decemviri. They're saying, look, if you guys will just step down of your own free will, and we just reappoint consuls, the plebs would be so happy, we could kind of be done with the tribunes. And we could get past the tribunes of the plebs. And so the senators are trying to talk these guys into just giving up the power without the senators using the plebs to force them to give up the power. So they're kind of trying to play that game. They're still very angry. Bitter hatred has been building up over past feuds over and over and over again. These guys are very angry at each other. So a lot of resentment, a lot of anger. Everyone's kind of being a little bit petty, trying to get everything they can out of the situation. Now, after it's clear that the Decemviri aren't going to step down from their position, one of the supporters of the Decemviri gets up and he says, you senators, you were always getting mad at tribunes for holding up levying the troops when they were trying to pass laws. Now you're going to hold up levying the troops like you can try and change the government. Let's deal with the external threat. And then if you have a problem with the Decemviri, you could actually plead your case then. But let's deal with Rome's enemies first. So that's what they agreed to do. The Senate agrees to help them levy the troops. Now, so they've got to levy two armies to go out and fight, one for the Aequi, one for the Sabines, right? And that army is going to have to be led by people who have power in the state. So what they're going to decide to do is, I think it's 4 Decemviri go with one army, 4 Decemviri go with another army, and 2 Decemviri are left in Rome to run things. In particular, who's the last guy you want leading an army?
What's his face?
Appius Claudius. So him, and then there was another Decemviri who was kind of like his enforcer, his right-hand man. So Appius Claudius and the other Decemviri who was seen as like his right-hand man, those are the two left back in Rome. The two that they're worried the armies would be the least willing to follow. So they'll take care of things at Rome. 4 Decemviris go off with each army, and that's the way it's going to go. Now, these armies behave exactly how you expect them to behave. So the army that's going up to fight the Sabines, they go up, they hardly put up a fight, and then they run back to their camp on a hill, nice and good, fortified. And they're not really going to fight it. The ones who were supposed to go fight the Aequi, they go, they fight them, intentionally lose a battle, and run into the city of Tusculum, and post up there. And so both armies intentionally on the defensive, the Sabines and the Aequi still ravaging the lands however they want, gathering up plunder. So both armies pretty much intentionally lost, and now they're just camped out as armies. The Decemviri, not letting don't let a good catastrophe go to waste, or whatever it is. While they're while they're out fighting the Sabines, one of the Decemviri, since Rome is retreating and they need to just find a good defensive position, they send a guy, Lucius Siccius, out to, they give him the job of see if you can go find a better area for us to set up camp. So this is a soldier, Roman soldier with the army out fighting the Sabines. They got their one defensive position, they're worried, the Decemviri say it's not a good enough position, we need you to go find a better position. Now he, during all the time that the Decemviri were in power, has been one of the very vocal plebs about we need to get rid of the Decemviri. The people need the power of appeal again. We can't tolerate these abuses. So, since he was such an avid supporter of the plebs, the Decemviri, when they send him off, they send him with the scouting party to go with him. And they tell that scouting party, once you get far enough from the camp, kill him. And then pretend it was an enemy's attack. When the scouts that go with him try to kill him, in the process, he actually kills a few of them. So when they come back just a few troops, the scouting party, saying that we'd been attacked, some of the other soldiers went to go gather up the bodies, the equipment, or whatever. And when they went and they saw that was just him and other Roman guys dead around him. There's no Sabines in this area. And so it becomes pretty clear, no, these guys killed him. So the Roman army puts it together pretty quick, and so that's spreading amongst the Roman troops in one army that the Decemviri just had this guy killed, who would have been an important pleb, a well-known pleb. So Roman army not happy about that. Now, the other army. Well, the other army is more tied to what's going on in the city. But understand, we talked about why the Sabine army is mad. The army fighting the Sabines. Two angry armies. Talked about why the army fighting the Sabines is angry. Guy was assassinated. The other army is going to be angry about something else. So now we're going to get into Lucretia type story. Remember Lucretia?
Yeah.
All right. So there's going to be some beautiful plebeian girl by the name of Verginia. Well, all the armies are gone, and Appius Claudius and his thug are there with just their lictors. He's still enjoying his life. He sees this beautiful girl, and he decides to attempt to seduce her. Now, she is the daughter of Verginius, hence her name. Notice that her name's not spelled Virginia like Virginia. It's spelled Verginia, like daughter of Verginius. Verginius, he's a centurion, and he is with the Aequi army. Oops. So, ultimately, something's going to happen that's going to lead to the Aequi army being outraged, and both armies are going to be outraged. So you know why this army's outraged, now we're going to go over why this army's going to become outraged. That's what I'm trying to set up there. So, Appius Claudius tries to seduce Verginia, daughter of Verginius, a centurion in the army out fighting the Aequi, and also an important plebeian. Now, Verginius had already set up, Verginia is already engaged to be married, basically, to a guy who used to be a tribune of the plebs. So a very powerful pleb is what we're talking about. And she's betrothed to a very powerful pleb at the time that Appius Claudius does this. Aesilius, yes. So Verginia is betrothed to Aesilius. He's betrothed to her, she's the daughter of him. Okay. Now, since she won't allow herself to be seduced by Appius Claudius, he puts together a plot with Marcus Claudius. Marcus Claudius is like his cousin or uncle or something like that. So here's the plot that they come up with. Marcus Claudius, someone that's not Appius Claudius, Marcus Claudius is going to accuse Verginia of being the daughter of one of his slaves, and therefore legally his property. You follow that? Who is going to sit in trial to determine whether she is or she isn't? The Decemviri who was left at Rome to govern Rome. So the case will be brought up to Appius Claudius. So the plot is, you will accuse her of being the daughter of one of your slaves. I will agree that, yep, she is the daughter of one of your slaves and therefore your property, and then you're going to give her to me. That's the plan. Follow the plan so far?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's exactly what happens. Poor girl, with like her, what are they called? The older ladies who like look after her, her caretakers or whatever, looking after the younger girl. One day they're walking through the forum, and the forum, the public area out in the public of Rome, but the forum is particularly where you bring court cases before the public, but it's also just like the center of Rome. So there she is with her caretakers walking through the forum, and Marcus Claudius accuses her of being the daughter of one of his slaves, and saying, you need to come with me, you're my property. The caregivers of the girl right there say, what are you talking about? We've been with her entire life, this is definitely a lie. And so it starts making a scene, and more people start getting involved, saying, what are you doing, what are you doing? And eventually, Icilius, who happened to be in the city of Rome still, gets word that this is happening, and so he runs to the forum. And so now he's out there saying that, no, she definitely is not. She definitely is not a slave, and you ought to put this on hold until, at the very least, Verginius can come back in the city, because he's out buying the Aequi. So you're bringing these charges against her when her father isn't even here. This is completely unjustified. At the very least, you ought to put this off for a day and give him a chance to come. And so, Appius Claudius, who's now standing at the head of the forum watching what's going on, he sees this happening. He says, okay, I'll hear what everyone's saying and I'll listen to both sides here. And he says, you know what, fine, that's fair enough. We'll put a pause in this case until her father can be sent for. Now, as soon as it's said that we'll put a pause in this case until her father can be sent for, just that message going out amongst the crowd, some people in the crowd already take it upon themselves to go let him know. And so people have already left Rome to go let him know what's going on. So Appius Claudius, he says, great, we'll put this off for a day, but in the meantime, since we can't deprive poor Marcus Claudius of his property, she has to go with him. But the case will be decided tomorrow, and if Verginius doesn't show up, then we'll view that as him deciding that it's not worth taking up the case. So we'll give him a day to make it to the city. We'll do the case tomorrow. In the meantime, we can't deny Marcus Claudius of his property. And so she has to go with Marcus Claudius. Now her betrothed is absolutely furious by this. He's pretty much saying, over my dead body. You're going to have to kill me if you want to take her. Or, let's see, I got a direct quote from him. As for my part, in vindicating the liberty of my spouse, life shall leave me sooner than my honor. So you can send your lictors to try and come arrest her. I'm going to kill as many as I can, and they're going to have to kill me. That's what this is going to come to. Now, Appius Claudius is worried about creating a martyr here and having the whole mob get angry at him and suddenly turn against him. He can feel the wave of public opinion going against him. And so he says, well, very well, we'll let her out on bail. So you need the bail money. The problem is that Icilius here doesn't have very much money. He can't afford the bail. But a bunch of people in the crowd hearing this, they say, we'll be sureties for it. And so they all offer up the money to be the bail so that the case can go forward. So Icilius, very grateful to the people around him, says thank you. So she's allowed out on bail for one day in order for it to continue. And Appius Claudius, he makes some speech about, oh, Marcus Claudius, will you, for the sake of the crowd, forfeit your property for a day so that da-da-da-da-da. Trying to make it seem like Marcus Claudius is making a big sacrifice here. And Marcus Claudius is promising that even when Verginius does come here, I will convince him so thoroughly that she's my property that even he'll be convinced. So, trying to tell the crowd that this is a sure thing, but for the sake of you all, I will sacrifice my property and let her go for a day. Now, Appius Claudius, as soon as he can get away from the crowd, away from the forum, he sends messages to the Aequi camp to, under no means, let Verginius off duty for a day. Keep him there for a day at least. And so he sends that messenger books it to the Aequi camp. Unfortunately, word had already gotten out, and Verginius had already got a leave of absence accepted, and was already on his way back to the city before the messenger could get there. So Appius Claudius' plan didn't work out there. And then, so the following day, Verginius shows up there at the trial. He's brought just tons of people who have known this girl all her life to vouch for every little bit of her education from childhood all the way up. Very clear case. This is unequivocally my daughter. And so after Verginius gives up and he gives his big speech, making it completely clear that it's his daughter, Marcus Claudius gets up and he gets ready to give his speech to present his side. And before he can even present his side, Appius Claudius interrupts him and says, it's clear the girl's a slave. Didn't even hear the defense. The whole crowd is shocked. They're all speechless. And Appius Claudius tells the lictors to seize the girl. And he says, because he's worried about the crowd suddenly turning against him, he says, I also know that you were really using this whole situation to stir up the crowd to try and overthrow our government. And so I've already sent for an army and they're on their way here. And so if any of you plebs misbehave, you'll basically be charged with sedition, trying to overthrow the government. So he says, it's a slave, and I got a big army coming. Are any of you plebs going to try and stop me from taking her? As here comes my lictors to arrest her and take her as a slave. Everyone's in shock, dumbfounded. No one's moving. The crowd parts as the lictors come to get the poor girl. Verginius, no clue what to do, ends up taking a knife and stabbing his own daughter, killing her in front of everyone, saying, in this one way, the only way in my power, do I secure your liberty. Because otherwise, she's basically going to live as a prostitute. And that snaps the crowd out of their complacency that they were in for a second, being afraid for their lives. And so now the crowd starts working up in anger. Appius Claudius, mostly mad at Icilius here. Remember, Icilius was a past tribune, so old beef there. But saying that he was the one who was stirring up the sedition against Rome, he was the one being charged with it, he now tells the lictors to turn and arrest him at the very least. If I can't get the girl, I'll at least get my enemy. Now, two patricians who happened to be in the city at the time, Lucius Valerius and Marcus Herodius, they now step in, and when the patrician gets involved, understand, patricians still hold like that place of being noble in the minds of the people. They still view him as noble blood, huh?
Fatherly figure.
Yeah, fatherly figures. And so when they step in front of the lectors to stop them from arresting him, now the crowd is starting to feel a bit more emboldened. So with them stepping in to prevent the lictors, they say that they would protect Icilius from the prosecution of a mere citizen, meaning you are not in a position of power, Mr. Decemviri. You are now just a private citizen. Your term is expired. And that if he sought to make use of violence, they too would be a match for him. Well, with that, the crowd's becoming more emboldened. Appius Claudius is realizing he's in trouble. His lictors are starting to be abused in the crowd, and they're starting to draw away. Appius Claudius realizes his life is quickly becoming at risk. So he quickly throws his toga up over his head to hide his face and sneaks into the closest house he can find to hide and wait it out while the crowd gets angry and eventually disperses and calms down. What ends up happening is now Verginius, with his dead daughter, is now going to go up to the Aequi army and explain to them what had just happened. And 400 people who were there as witnesses are going to go with him to make it clear that he's not making up any story. So, very much got another Lucretia type story going on. So Verginius goes to the army fighting the Aequi. That was the army he was normally from, with the 400 and his dead daughter. And he explains to them what happened. Go ahead.
They just carried the corpse.
Yeah, so he's carrying the corpse. He's breaking down in tears, blubbering. He already had lost his wife like a couple years earlier, and she was his only daughter.
Oh, that's really rough.
Yeah, he's destroyed. And so as he goes into the camp with these 400 people, he's telling them what's happening. He says, the only reason I haven't taken my own life is for the sake of your wives and your daughters. That's the only reason I'm bothering to come back. I've already lost my wife. I've now lost my only daughter. There's nothing more that they can do to me save take my life, which it wouldn't be a big deal at this point. And so he says, I want you to know how he has behaved and what drove me to do this action to my very own daughter. And it could just as easily have been your daughter in this situation. And so that spreads throughout the army, and the army becomes infuriated. And so they're done listening to the 4 Decemviri there. I'm not sure what happened to them. Those guys probably booked it, got out of camp. And that whole army goes with Verginius back to Rome.
Even though they're still being attacked?
Yeah, completely ignoring the enemy. The army's out there ransacking whatever. These guys just leave right out of Tusculum on their way back to Rome. Aequi probably thought they were lining up to attack him. I don't know. I don't know what the Aequi thought. Anyways, they march into Rome, fully armed, have their standards, have everything. An army entering Rome, you cannot come into Rome with a weapon. That's illegal. Death penalty. Whole army just marched into Rome, completely armed. And to any man, any patrician who tried to stop them, their answer was that they were men and had arms. You gonna try to stop me? You're gonna have to kill me, and I'm gonna try to kill you in the process. That's what it's gonna come to. Then they go to their Aventine Hill, set up camp. Now, the Senate is absolutely terrified. An army, Roman army, just marched into Rome, fully armed, and now they're up on the Aventine Hill. One over from the Capitoline Hill where they are. Not comfortable. The Senate sends ambassadors over to the plebs to try and figure out what is going on here. And how, basically, try and negotiate basically negotiate with them. Try and figure out what they can do to satisfy this army that's now in the middle of Rome. You're on the Aventine Hill. I think the senators typically meet on the Capitoline Hill, but I could be wrong about that. They meet in temples in various places, and I think most of the big shot temples are on the Capitoline Hill. Anyways, the plebs, not really having a leader who's leading this army, they don't really have set leaders yet. What they say is that they will only treat with Valerius and Herodias, the 2 patricians who were protecting Icilius, betrothed of Verginia. Follow all that? They were the 2 patricians who stepped in. Okay, so they're saying these 2 are for sure on our side. They're the only 2 that we will treat with. And so the ambassadors from the Senate go back to the Senate House for the senators to start discussing what it is that they should do, trying to decide what they should do. Now, Verginius, he gets the people together, and he says, look, we've already embarrassed ourselves once in the forum because we didn't have a head. We didn't have someone leading us, and so we all just stood there like idiots while these 12 lictors came and did something that we all knew we should stop. So we need to appoint some leaders, and then we'll get behind those leaders. And so he suggests appointing 10 tribunes of the soldiers is what they call them. Tribal leaders, 10 tribal leaders of the soldiers. And so the army, they very much like that. And they decide, well, Verginius, you're as qualified as anyone. And he declines, saying, you should definitely pick someone that's not me. I'm the most emotionally invested in this thing. You need to pick someone not as emotionally invested as I am right now. Because I just want vengeance. So pick someone else. But he'll do everything he can in a private position. So they end up selecting 10 people now to lead this army that is now in Rome. So now there's an army in Rome, and it has 10 leaders. Much more organized now. Because they left all the patricians behind back at camp, so they left a bunch of their leadership back in camp. Okay. Now, the army that was fighting the Sabines, they were already furious about that guy who got murdered out looking for a place to set the next camp, one of their higher-up plebs. When they hear what had gone on with Verginius and his whole army, they decide, we should probably go join our brothers. They're in Rome. So they pack up and they start heading to Rome. And they got word that this army, the Aequian army, had already selected 10 leaders. And so they decide that they should probably do the same thing before they go into the city. So they select their 10 leaders and then they march into the city. And so now both the armies are there on the Aventine Hill in the middle of Rome. They have the 2 armies together, Now the 20 tribunes of the soldiers, 10 for each army, those 20 get together and they decide that they should select one from each to be the top commander, top general. And so now there's 2 leaders over the 20 leaders over the army. Make sense? And so now they're getting very organized and in very much a position to start fighting. Senate is freaking out. And so they get word back that the army on the Aventine Hill will only meet with Valerius and Herodias. Now, Valerius and Herodias, these were 2 patricians who were absolutely against the Decemviri and have been furious about it the whole time. I told you most of the senators left the city. These were 2 who did not leave the city and have been, in their own ways, trying to cause the problems that they could, trying to get power back to the way it used to be. And so, when they find out that the plebs said that they'll only meet with them, they say, we're not going to go until the Decemviri resign from their powers, seeing that they finally have some political leverage to use to get the Decemviri to step down. The Decemviri refuses to step down. So, the Roman Senate, remember, the Senate's still kind of trying to be petty, still trying to come up with some way of working this whole thing out where we can make the plebs happy, the Decemviri will sit down, and we can somehow do this without having tribunes of the plebs again. So that's really what's holding up a lot of senators here and all their arguing about how to deal with things. The plebeians, they think that one of the reasons Rome is feeling comfortable drawing out these negotiations and arguing for this extended period of time, they think one of the reasons that the Senate feels so comfortable is because the army is still there in Rome. And they think that the senators must think that if Rome was actually attacked by one of these other armies, we would go out there and fight. So what we need to do is we need to actually just leave the city altogether. And so they leave the city altogether and they go to the sacred mountain outside the city. So now the whole army up and leaves the city. And so now Rome is pretty much vacated. You got some women, you got some kids, but all the male fighting age men are gone. Rome's pretty empty. And Valerius and Herodias, they're still always telling the Decemviri they need to step down every time that they're having these arguments in the Senate House. And one of the things they say to him is, there's now more lictors in the forum than there are plebs. All the plebs are gone. We have more police than we have citizens. That's what you've driven Rome to. How much further do you plan on taking this? If we were to get attacked right now, we'd be done for. Does hanging on to the power really matter that much to you? Now, the Decemviri come up with one clever last line of defense. They say, well, we were elected to put into law the 12 tables, and so we refuse to step down until all the 12 tables have been passed. Remember, only 10 have been passed so far. So there's still 2 more to pass. Now, why is that a clever way for them to try and get out of this? How do you pass the laws? You need the assembly to vote on the laws. So they say, not until the assembly votes on the laws, or in other words, the plebs come back in the city and do the votes, which they obviously won't do. That's called out as just basically trying to get out of it. Really, they need to step down. After enough pressure and enough time and enough freaking out, the Decemviri finally agrees to resign under one condition. They have to be protected. You can't let these plebs come after us once we step out of power for all the bad things that we did to them while we were in power. They say that's our only condition, and we'll step down. So Valerius and Herodias finally saying, you know what, those are some terms we can finally accept. We will now go meet with the plebs and see what we can start negotiating with. So this whole time, no negotiating between the plebs and the patricians. Extended over a significant period of time. So now they finally go meet with the plebs on the hill to see what it would take for the plebs to come back to the city. Go ahead.
How much time is this taking?
Hard to know from just what I'm reading, but
What
significant
about-
periods of time.
How's that 2 armies?
Yeah.
They just, like, they were in the middle of a fight.
No, they were in a very defensive position, just holding up and letting the other armies go ransack the lands.
So they're just still ransacking.
Yeah. It's like if I break into your house and I see you might try to stop me, but then you sit down and watch TV while I'm robbing you. Probably just keep robbing you while you're sitting there.
Or you've already left.
It's like if he's not going to do anything, and if he ups and goes to the kitchen to make a sandwich. Okay. Nice stereo.
Aren't a lot of those lands allied lands?
Yes, they are allied lands.
It's a disaster
And this
for
is a
Rome.
disaster for Rome's allies.
Yeah, that's really.
And so my question is, why wouldn't the plebs just charge into these buildings and either kill or force the Decemviri out of their position?
It's a very strange thing, but when governments are overthrown, it's rarely led by the masses. It's typically the masses appoint some sort of dictator who leads them, or they get behind the nobles, and it's actually the nobles who are responsible for doing the overthrowing. And it's just the way it typically goes in history. It's very strange. It's never just the masses overthrowing and setting themselves up. They need a head. And the nobility already feel comfortable functioning as a head. And so they instantly just take that upon themselves, and so the organization works. People who aren't used to being a head, they never just organize some heads amongst themselves. That's a rare thing.
So the army being somewhat headless is like begging for just the head to do something, basically.
Right. So the plebs for all this time have kind of been holding out hope that the patricians were going to lead them up against the Decemviri. And that's what they've been waiting for. And that's what's not happening.
Interesting. I guess the Decemviri are getting nice to the patricians. That explains why the patricians aren't so motivated to overthrow them.
Right, and they kind of don't want to help the plebs.
Exactly.
Keep in mind there's also that petty element.
Yes.
That, yes.
You're right. Okay, that makes sense.
Okay. So, so Valerius and Herodias, now that the Decemviri have agreed to step down so long as they're protected, now they're ready to go talk to the plebs and see what it would take for the plebs to come back to the city and things to kind of get back to normal. What do the plebs want? Well, first and foremost, plebs want their tribunes back. They want the right of appeal again. They've seen like a lot of their friends die in completely unjust ways, for example, and have their property just seized from them. And they want the Decemviri handed over to them. And even a bunch of the plebs, while Valerius and Herodias are over there talking to him, a bunch of the plebs talk about how they want to burn him alive. That's what they want to do to punish him. So, Valerius and Herodias, they say, your first two positions, those are very reasonable, and those are very just. This last one, are you so quick to use cruelty against those you accuse of being cruel? Or are you going to just turn around and do exactly what they did? So, they end up agreeing to the plebs, these first two, and they're saying for the last one, the Decemviris, we have to deal with them on an individual case, and they have to be dealt with legally, whatever the laws are. The laws do not permit you to burn someone alive. So that's off the table, as an example. So you can't just judge one to be guilty for what, or you can't judge them all to be guilty for what one of them did. And you have to deal with them legally. And that's what ends up being decided. So you get your tribunes, you get the right of appeal, so things are kind of back to the way they were, and these conditions in dealing with the Decemviri. Go ahead.
Does that count as protection? Or, like,
Just because they're like that.
It's what they end up agreeing to is the second part. So the Decemviri agree that they will shut down as long as one is not, they're not all guilty for what one does, and they're treated with legally. Now, Appius Claudius very much thought that he was going to his death in giving up the power. So the Decemviri resign, all of Rome celebrates, the armies come back, big holiday, everyone celebrating, having a good old time. The Pontifex Maximus goes to the Aventine Hill, where all the plebs are. The armies are told to go gather on the Aventine Hill. The Pontifex Maximus goes there and oversees the election now of their next 10 tribunes. Because typically a tribune had to oversee a tribune's election, but they didn't have tribunes to do that, so the Pontifex Maximus did it. And for the senators, they appoint an interrex, kind of like quarterback what they had with the kings, an interrex to function while they elect some consuls and some quaestors and some aediles. So we're getting all our magistrates back, we're getting our tribunes back, Rome's going back to the way it was. In particular, amongst the tribunes is going to be Verginius and Icilius. The father of Verginia and who was going to be the future husband of Verginia as tribunes. They're going to have a bone to pick with the Decemviri. And then Valerius and Herodias are elected as consuls. The two who were on the side of the plebs. So the plebs have two very determined tribunes, and they have two very sympathetic consuls. So everything's going to start coming up pleb. And we're going to see the swing of the pendulum here. Now they push forward, once they come to power, 5 major pieces of legislation. Go over what each of them are. Now, called the Lex Valeria Herodia simply because it's the law passed by those two consuls. So just remind you how you read these laws and what they are. But what did the legislation actually push forward? So first off, huge one here now. Remember, one of the major problems that Rome has had up till now is tribunes trying to illegally force through laws using the, what's the body that they have? The committee of the plebs, the public assembly, right? So now, what this first law does is it confirm that laws proposed by the tribunes and passed by the Comitia Centuriata were binding on all Romans. So what the tribunes were doing, what is the committee of the plebs called? Whatever it's called.
Isn't it the Comitia Centuriata?
No, this is the committee by century, which is one where wealth is completely disproportionate.
Right.
And between the patricians, the equestors, and the first-class citizens, you already have a majority vote. And so your top 5% of wealth in the state pretty much determines how the vote goes.
Does this have something to do with the tribes?
It's, yeah, so the assembly of the plebs, can't remember what it's called, that's organized by tribe, and each tribe gets equal say. And so that one is the most democratic way of voting, kind of giving everyone equal representation. Now, the laws that were passed in the plebs assembly were only binding on plebs. So tribunes could propose laws for the plebs, have the plebs vote on it, and those laws were binding on the plebs. What the tribunes kept doing is creating laws that didn't just apply to plebs, but also applied to patricians, and tried passing them in the plebeian assembly, and saying that will now make the law passed. And so the only way that the Romans had to deal with that, the patricians had to deal with that, is to stop them from voting on the law. So now this gives them an outlet. If you need a law that's binding on everyone, we will now make it legal for tribunes to propose law to the Comitia Centuriata, which is everyone, including patricians and plebs. And remember that it's skewed towards the wealthy.
Yeah.
So the wealthy will pretty much dictate how those laws go. But the point is, now tribunes, if they want a law to be binding on everyone, there's now an assembly that they can go to get that law passed and now binding on everyone. And so they can stop trying to force these laws through illegally. Gives them a legal outlet. And yeah, so since the patricians, since the laws have patrician participation, they are justifiably binding now on the patricians. It was the excuse the patricians were using over and over again on why a law passed by the plebs can't be binding on the patricians. It's because we had no say over it. So now they have a say. Go ahead.
Does that mean that they can't do any more laws for just the plebeians and only do that?
They
for
can
the
still do the
citizens?
laws just for the plebeians. But if the law somehow affects patricians, now it has to come through here.
Even laws about how you do laws.
Even laws about, there would have to be some deciding about how to do that. But the point is, now they have an outlet. They don't just have their one way that they can go try and force the law through if they want it passed. So that's a big law that is going to help relieve some of the stress. Next one, once again, gave assembly right of appeal to the people against capital or corporeal punishments now. Corporal punishment, sorry, not corporeal. Corporal punishments.
Is that how you say it?
No, sorry. Now, the assembly already had right of appeal prior to the Decemviri. The tribunes wanted to make sure that we pass this law again, just to make sure it's very clear that the law was again passed. So that's one that they kind of already had. It was just against capital punishment before. They extended a little bit, but they also want to make sure that they repass the laws that they had before, just like there's no saying, oh, that was a law before, but since the government switched, it's not a law anymore. So, recovering their bases. And any magistrate now that did not allow for an appeal can now be killed. So if any magistrate, remember that a tribune is not a magistrate. This is consuls, quaestors, aediles, praetors, those positions. If they do not allow for an appeal, they can be killed. So the people have right of appeal. If you try and deny them that right, you can now legally be killed. Very worried about what the Decemviri just did. So they're trying to prevent any position like the Decemviri from ever existing again. You cannot create a magistrate that there's no appeal from. Whatever the law is, that can't happen. Next one, once again, establishing the establishing that tribunes are going to be sacrosanct. Say it that way. So, declares that tribunes, aediles, and judges, I've been saying up till now praetors a few times. I guess praetors don't actually exist yet. So our magistrates are just consuls, aediles, and quaestors right now. Not praetors, but then they put judges there because sometimes someone is appointed to be a judge. And while they're functioning in the position of a judge, they're sacrosanct. You cannot kill them. Now, there's two different levels of being sacrosanct in Rome. The tribunes are sacrosanct. The tribunes and then the vestal virgins are the other ones. They're the special level of sacrosanct, where to interfere with them anyway is death. The second level of sacrosanct is the one that is going to apply to consuls, aediles, quaestors, praetors when they become a thing. This is that you can't interfere with what they're doing unless you're on the same power as them or higher. So a consul can interfere with a consul, but you can't interfere with a consul. And a consul can interfere with an aedile cannot interfere with a consul. So tribunes have their own special sacrosanct, which is nobody gets to mess with them. And then consuls, the rest of the positions, they have their, it's depending on how high up you are. Because there's that cursus honorum. And so there's an established level of positions. Who's above who? That makes sense? And then, so if you interfere with the tribune, that's death. Interfering with the other guys, it could potentially be death, or it could just be the case that you're fined all your property and it's given over to the state. So you could get away with a slap on the wrist. Just lose everything.
Pretty big slap.
Yeah, this is a joke. Okay, the next major piece of legislation. So remember that now the laws that are written, the 12 tables of Roman law, those are now written and in the form. So everyone can now know what the laws are. And in fact, it's going to become a regular thing that as a schoolboy growing up in Rome, one of your things you have to do as you go through school is memorize the 12 tables of Roman law. That's going to become a thing. Like everyone knows the 12 tables of the Roman law.
That's awesome.
Huh?
That's awesome.
Yeah. Very much involved in politics, if you're a Roman. The other thing that they do is they require an archiving of all Senate decrees. So remember that the Senate doesn't really pass laws. What they do is they pass recommendation type things that often end up becoming laws. And so these Senate recommendations, since the plebs can't see what the Senate is actually recommending, and when they go and present it to the people, you know, they're kind of just talking to them. They want to know exactly what this thing is that we're talking about. It has to be in writing somewhere. So all the Senate recommendations, all the Senate decrees, the Senatus Consulta is what they're called, they must be recorded and stored with the plebeian aediles in some temple. Remember, 2 aediles are plebs, 2 aediles are patricians. So the 2 plebeian aediles have to have a written down record of whatever the Senate is trying to pass that will ultimately be presented to the people. And so in effect, it's essentially keeping records of all future laws in somewhere that the plebs have access to it. Go ahead.
How many people at this time could read and write?
I have no idea.
Because if they're going through this much effort to record everything and write it down, that kind of implies that the majority of people can read.
I would guess that the majority of the citizens were literate.
Do they have an education system?
Did they have a formalized education system at this time? I doubt it. The way it comes across in what I'm reading is it's very much the case that you kind of, very tutor-based.
So you hire a tutor.
Yes. Maybe hire them. Maybe it's someone in the family who that's just kind of what they do. I don't know. But seems like it's more tutor-based.
So is this the Senate finally getting some power, or are they still just more precedent?
No, the Senate is losing power left and right here.
It sounds like this whole dragging their feet and letting the plebs face the consequences of their choices actually backfiring hardcore onto the patricians.
Yeah, since it ultimately took the plebs to get rid of the Decemviri, the plebs are largely the one now set the terms.
Wow.
The patricians had their chance, so to speak, and missed it. And then finally the last one, imposed flogging and execution on anyone who prevented the election of tribunes or created magistrates without the right of appeal. So notice up here, it says any magistrate that didn't allow appeal could be killed. So if you're trying to function as a Decemviri, I can kill you for that. Down here it's saying, if you even try to make the Decemviri a position in government, I can kill you for that. So we're going to make sure that those Decemviris are just never a thing again, and no one's ever going to take our tribunes from us again. We'll always have our tribunes now.
Do they still have trophies?
They have their tribunes all the way through the Roman Republic. I'm not sure the technicalities of the empire and how things ran and what the government was mostly like. So I don't know that one as well. I would guess a bunch of these positions just slowly died out.
Really?
I'm not positive, so I have to get to that. I mean, obviously the emperor can be overruled, but were they still functioning in minor positions? I have no idea.
Yeah.
I haven't ever learned the Roman Empire like I have the Roman Republic. So, and we'll never get there, so. Okay, so those are the 5 major pieces of legislation that they get passed. So the plebs are in a very good position here now, legally speaking. Any questions on any of those? Okay, so now that the tribunes are in power, in particular Verginius and Icilius are in power, they're going to be coming after Appius Claudius. So they get the power. One of the first trials they're bringing is against Appius Claudius for what he did. And they tell him that he can submit to a judge, basically admitting guilt, or he can sit in prison until he's ready to submit to a judge and admit guilt. And he says, no, I want to appeal my case to the public. I think that I can actually present a good case to the public that they should in some way be lenient with me. In other words, he's trying to talk his way out of getting killed, is what he wants to try and do with the public. And remember that he was loved by the people, going back a couple of years. Absolutely loved by them. And everyone agrees that the laws he helped pass, remember, he was part of both Decemviri. He was also part of the first one, who did a great job ruling, passed lots of laws that everyone agreed are very good laws. He's going to argue that he did a lot of great things for the state. And yeah, he did some bad things too, but you take the good with the bad and let me live. Right? So he wants right of appeal, which every Roman citizen legally has. The tribunes deny him the right of appeal. The 2 consuls who are in power are both kind of plebeian sympathizers. They let that slide. And so Appius Claudius is denied the right of appeal right after they pass all these laws. Legally, the tribunes blocking him from getting appeal should be killed now. Anyone who blocks the right of appeal should be killed. That's one of the laws that they just passed. And they're blocking the right of appeal for Appius Claudius. He's sent to prison. He's heard the rumors that the plebs want to burn him alive. He doesn't want to be burned alive. He kills himself in prison. His right-hand man was Appius, whatever, Courtesan, Oppius, this guy. It's a fancy way of spelling Bob. Bob here. He was his major enforcer and carried out a bunch of his whatever he wanted to do. He was also denied appeal. And so, he was also sent in prison to determine what his sentence was going to be. He was worried that was going to be some cruel and unusual punishment, so to speak. And so he also commits suicide in prison. So already 2 people right out the gate denied appeal by the tribunes. You can already see the pendulum swinging the other way. The other 8 Decemviri, they willingly exile themselves before any trial comes against them. So while you can say that they weren't illegally treated, you can also say they weren't waiting around to be illegally treated and decided that it was best to just get out of town.
Did all the Decemviri abuse their power like Appius?
Not like Appius, and not like this guy, but they all abuse their powers.
Interesting.
And so they were all going to be, they at least seem to have been convinced that they were going to be killed if they didn't get out of town.
And they were elected too.
They were elected, but they were elected.
Yeah.
Appius Claudius was elected, loved by the people. And then in his position, he got whoever he wanted also elected. They just needed enough support to get elected. Showed you how if you had if at least 30% of the people voted for you over the other guy, then you could work it out so that you were the one who got elected.
Okay, wait, hold on. So there were actually 20 Decemviri, and this was the 8 that were Appius's buddies.
Right, so we had 10 Decemviri the first time, 10 Decemviri the second time. Appius Claudius is the only one who serves on both those.
Gotcha. Okay.
The other 9 were older men, loved by the people. They came, they did their job, they left.
And they made the worst decision of their life.
By letting Appius Claudius oversee the elections. Yes, they thought they were being clever, thought that there's no way you would oversee your own election and run for election. What are you, a pleb? Running for tribune? Patricians don't do that. Well, patricians did it. And so, now, if you're a patrician looking at this, what did you just see happen? You had the plebs agree that they would treat with these guys at the very least legally and wouldn't attribute group guilt. They seem to be doing exactly those things, and furthermore, they're doing this to some of the most powerful people in the state. And so the rest of the patricians looking at what's going on, they're very concerned about these violations of rights. If they're willing to do this against those guys, and remember what they did to past consuls already, who's going to stop them from doing it with our future magistrates going forward? And so they're furious that the tribunes are abusing their power this way, and they're also furious at their consuls for not doing anything. The consuls are supposed to help protect the patricians' interests. And the consuls aren't stepping in saying, well, you guys are abusing your power. We won't kill you for doing this, but knock it off. Now, it's actually one of the tribunes talking to the other tribunes who decides that they need to rein themselves in. So he says that there has been enough of liberty on our own part and of vengeance on our enemies. So we've gotten our fill. It's neither pleasing to me that old crimes now forgotten should be again brought forward. We can't go digging through the past and bring crimes against people now that we have the power and start going after them. Seeing that the recent ones have been atoned for by the punishment of the Decemvirs, and the unrelenting care of both the consuls in defending your liberties is ample security that nothing will be committed which will call for tribunician interference. So the 2 consuls in power right now are already plebeian sympathizers. So they're saying for the rest of the year we're going to step back. We got our vengeance. We're not going to continue trying to get vengeance. There's good consuls in power right now. We don't need to worry about interfering with them. We're going to take a back seat so that we don't step too far with the tribune power. And so now, that makes the patricians even angrier at their consuls. They say even the tribunes are more concerned about us being treated right than you consuls, who are supposed to be looking out for our interests. So they're very angry at their consuls right now.
And everything's such a fine line.
And now that some amount of peace has been established there in Rome and things are going much better, at least for the plebs, it's time to deal with those armies that have been out just having the time of their life, right? Because the allies can't really fight. Roman allies aren't allowed to raise their own armies and defend themselves. Rome is responsible for protecting them. And so Roman's enemies have just been having a heyday. So they levy the 2 armies and they got to go out and deal with the 2 different armies. One of the consuls is sent to fight both the Volsci and the Aequi. They're together, I think, in Latin territory, having fun. So Valerius, he's the one leading this army. Now he takes them and marches them. I want to say that it's in Latin territory. Do I have that written anywhere? I don't see where it's written, but I think it's in Latin territory. And so he takes them and he camps them somewhere in Latin territory, and he's got the enemy army somewhere over here in their camp. Now what he realizes, Valerius, so here's the Roman camp, what the Roman camp realizes is that we are drastically outnumbered. Now they kind of showed up slowly, finding out where these guys were. They didn't just make their presence very well known. Now the other army quickly discovers that a Roman camp is here. And so the other army, when they see the Roman camp, they say, oh, it's time to fight. And so they bring out their troops, line up their troops, getting ready to fight. Valerius tells his troops, don't make a sound, don't talk, don't do anything. We're not going to go out and fight. And so they're kind of going to just pretend no one's home. And so the army lines up a few times to fight him. And day after day, the Roman army just isn't coming out. On top of that, Valerius, when he found out where this army was, they hastily built their camp as fast as they could, and so they built an unusually small camp. And so they're kind of crowded in there, rather than their normal size camp. And so the Aequi and the Volsci armies that are here, combined together, looting, having fun, they decide that this must just be some sort of like small outpost that the Romans have, and that it's only garrisoned with enough troops to kind of defend itself. And that it's not really the Roman army. And so they decide that we'll leave enough troops here to sit here and watch them, that for sure it should be enough for as many people as they would have in that little camp. And then the rest of them go out looting, plundering, business as usual. Well, when that happens and the Romans see them go out looting and plundering, then the Roman army finally comes and lines itself up. The little army that was there realizes we're in trouble. Now they happen to still have a good amount of troops inside their own camp, so they have their troops start coming out of camp and lining up as fast as they can, and they send word to as many people around looting and plundering as they can to hurry up and come back and fight. And they're able to get a decent sized army thrown together, but the Romans instantly started attacking them even as they were coming out of the camp and as they're trying to gather their troops back up. So they took care of the fact that they were outnumbered because they're fighting both the Volsci and the Aequi rather than just one or the other. So far their plan is working. Yes. Okay, so they attack them while they're leaving the camp, and they're hurrying up and lining up as fast as they can. As the troops all finally get out of the camp, what the Romans did is there was some hole, big enough hole, their camp's further back like this, I guess. There was some big enough hole that they were able to take their cavalry and kind of launch it through someplace that they were able to break through their lines. And the Roman cavalry breaks through their lines, gets behind them, and now cuts off their retreat from going back into their camp. And so now the Roman army, somewhat outnumbering them, and the cavalry able to get behind them to stop them from getting to their camp. As they defeat them, the Volsci/Aequi don't really have anywhere to go. And so it is just a massive defeat for the Volsci and the Aequi here. They lose a huge portion of their army. They're not able to retreat back to their camp the way that they normally would. Make sense there? So, huge defeat for them. And Rome gets all the plunder that these guys have been gathering up for a long time. This is a good payday for these soldiers. Life's good for them. Decisive victory for Rome. So Valerius wins massive victory against the Volsci and the Aequi there. The other consul had to go deal with the Sabines, who have also been ransacking the land. So Herodias, he's the one leading his army against the Sabines. Now, the Sabines, they're feeling very emboldened. Remember, going back, it's been a while now that every time Rome's come to fight them, they kind of just instantly retreated against them, intentionally not putting up much of a fight. And so Herodias is very worried about just marching his army out and fighting against the Sabines. He's still kind of worried that his troops aren't very comfortable actually holding their ground and fighting. It's been a few years since Rome has had a good victory with these guys. And so the whole time he's kind of Rome staying in their camp, the Sabines have their camp or whatever. He's been intentionally just sending out small groups of men to fight small skirmishes with whenever he can see small groups of Sabines out there. Small little raiding fights, trying to test out, the strength of his men and trying to help them regain some of their confidence that you can win a battle. Win a little fight here, win a little fight there. The Sabines are getting really annoyed, saying, you came out to fight and yet you keep not fighting us. You keep doing these little raiding fights, and as soon as we get our army out, you run back into your camp. Are we going to fight or what? Eventually, the Sabine army gets news of what happened with the Volsci and the Aequi, and that huge victory. And when they get news of that huge victory, they say, we want a victory of our own. So they tested themselves out. Herodias is feeling like the guys have some of their confidence back. Getting the news about the other Roman victory has really bolstered their confidence. Remember, morale is a huge thing for ancient warfare. You want that morale. And so even though they're slightly outnumbered, he's not really going to use any tricks or anything like that. They're just going to go flat out on the field and just face each other. Army versus army. Now remember, in these fights, typically what happens is the cavalry go fight each other first and then fall back, while the infantry do the majority of the fighting. So these guys' cavalry is going to be back here somewhere, a decent way into the fighting, and the Roman cavalry is going to be back here somewhere, a decent way into the fighting. What the Sabines did, since they knew that they outnumbered the Romans by a couple thousand, is they decided to take 2,000 of their men, keep them in reserve, to help them win on the left wing. So they had a surprise group of men over here on the left wing, another 2,000, to come and try and flank them and win on that side, and then that way win the whole battle. The Roman cavalry, seeing them coming, they run over there, hop off their horses, and they push forward to help them win the fight on that wing. Now remember, your Roman cavalry, those are going to be your elites, your nobles. And there's always that extra bit of umph when you see the guy right next to you is a noble. That must mean that this fight's a sure thing. He's not stupid. He's not going to risk his life if he doesn't have to. He's not like me, who has to be here no matter what. He could have been on his horse somewhere else. So this must be a sure thing. And so even though it's only 600 cavalry coming against the extra 2,000 Sabines, the difference in morale is enough that they end up overthrowing them on the left wing and winning on this side. And as soon as that happens, some of the other infantry, seeing what's happening, help them hurry up and get back on their horses and keep chasing them down. So chase them down, and then the cavalry, once the left wing starts collapsing, they then run around and help on the right side, get that to collapse, end up winning great victory there as well. Now, while the consul who went and was fighting the Volsci and the Aequi, he got a bunch of Volsci and Aequi stuff as well. The Sabines mostly just had what they were taking from the Romans. So unfortunately for these soldiers, most of what they got was just already Roman plunder that just needs to be returned to whoever it is. So they didn't get the wealth that the other guys got, mostly just have to return a bunch of stuff. But still a great decisive victory. Huge win over the Sabines, huge win over the Aequi, huge win over the Volsci. Rome just did fantastic militarily.
So they never actually hauled the stuff back to their cities? I'm confused as to
Yes. So the logistics of it are kind of like you go, you gather up the goods, and you kind of pile it up, and people kind of just bring receipts, so to speak, of what they lost. And they take from the pile an equivalent of what they lost.
Or they like mark, I imagine, initials on what.
I'm not sure details like that, but whatever it is, they come, they take what they have been deprived of, and then what's left is what's left. And so the guys who went after Sabines didn't get to keep as much. The guy who went after the Volsci and the Aequi, they got a lot more money. A lot more wealth. But both armies, massive victories. Rome is now in a very good place in terms of defensively with respect to other states. Now when both armies come back to Rome, they want to have a triumph. They definitely qualify for a triumph in terms of what they've achieved. So they want to have a big triumph. Now, who are leading these armies?
The consuls.
The consuls. How do the patricians feel about the consuls right now?
They don't like it.
They despise them. And so the Senate says, no, we're not giving you a triumph. And the people are so outraged because they feel they deserve a triumph that they tell them, no, we're going to have a triumph anyways. And so for the first time, an army enters Rome under triumph without the approval of the Senate. This had never happened before. Not even with the kings of Rome did this happen. Even a king did not enter Rome under triumph without the approval of the Senate. And so again, you can see how the pendulum is just swinging back to the plebs. And they're just going to do what they want, regardless of what the Senate says. Regardless of if it's legal. So pendulum swinging back, plebs way, everything's coming up plebs. So they have their triumph. Now, end of the first year, plebs are on a high. 9 out of the 10 tribunes of the plebs say, things have been so great for us this year because we had such good consuls. Next year, we probably aren't going to have nearly as good consuls as we had this year. And so what we need to do is make sure that we tribunes are the tribunes again. Because we'll for sure keep whatever the new consuls are in their place. So even though it's illegal, they're going to push to get themselves reelected again. 9 of the tribunes are on board with this plan. One of the tribunes does not like this plan. In his mind, it's illegal. We shouldn't be doing this. But the tribunes oversee the elections. Now, in practice, the way that the tribunes oversee the elections is they all are there to actually see what's going on, to make sure nothing fishy is going on, but they draw straws to decide who's going to be the one that actually says, yes, that's a valid vote, or no, that's an invalid vote. And when they draw straws, the guy who gets the short straw is the one tribune who's not on board with this plan of re-electing the same tribunes. So when the tribunes have their re-elections, the guy who got the short straw, he says, any votes that you plebs put forward for one of us 10 tribunes who are already tribunes are invalid votes. I'm sorry, it's against the law. And it's my job to make sure the law is upheld in the votes. So no, it goes in the garbage. And after all the votes are counted, only 5 people even got enough votes to even be a tribune. So, only 5 tribunes are elected. Now, the law was written to handle this situation when not 10 tribunes were elected, when less than 10 tribunes are elected, then however many are elected are allowed to decide amongst themselves whoever they want to be tribunes with them until all 10 are filled. So even though 10 tribunes don't have to be elected, they can keep filling up their positions until all 10 tribune positions are filled. And so, those 5 tribunes now get to decide who their co-tribunes are. And so, following the law, they appoint 5 companions to be tribunes with them, including 2 patricians. While you couldn't vote for a patrician to be tribune, there was nothing that says that a tribune couldn't appoint them to be their co-tribune. So, since these guys, the 9 of the 10 that went for office, were the ones that had the most plebeian support, then the 5 that were kind of the ones that patricians were pushing for were the ones who kind of came to power. And so it's largely guys who the patricians have bought off, so to speak, or at least are on favorable terms with the patricians, are now in the tribune position. Including 2 actual patricians are now tribunes. First time it's ever happened. Very strange position. And so now you see what this is setting up. Now the patricians are going to have all the power in the state. And I'm not going to bother going through all the details anymore, but the patricians having all the power in the state, they're going to go ahead and start abusing the plebs left and right. And then it's going to swing back and forth. And so you're going to see tribunes abuse their power. That is going to lead to some sort of backlash, and so the tribunes lighten up. They decide, hey, I'm actually going to follow the rules. The second they decide to follow the rules, it's going to lead to the patricians abusing their power. And then there's going to be some backlash, and the patricians are just like, you know what, we're going to lighten up. And the tribunes are going to see that as weakness, and they're going to start abusing their powers. And so there's this back and forth, back and forth. And this is not anyone talking from history. This is Livy giving his own commentary on the situation. So here's how Livy describes all this back and forth going on. He says, so difficult a thing is moderation in maintaining liberty. Whilst by pretending to desire equalization, every person raises himself in such a manner as to depress another. And men, by their very precautions against fear, cause themselves to become objects of dread. Setting up these precautions to stop something you fear happening, you then become an object of fear for someone else. And we saddle on others injustices thrown off from ourselves, as if it were actually necessary either to commit injustice or submit to it. So they're going back and forth. This year, are we the ones committing the injustice, or are we the ones submitting to the injustice? And they go back and forth, doing the pendulum dance.
Better than no pendulum dance.
Better than the pendulum just staying one way?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Sure.
Unless you can keep it there, moderate in the middle, like Levy's saying there. And so, that's what's going on. Skipping forward lots of years, this pendulum dance happening. patricians and tribunes, both abusing their powers, trying to get away with whatever they can. Until 1 year comes along, and once again, the Aequi are out there attacking. So fast forwarding 5 or 10 years, however far into the future. And the Aequi are attacking. Who's responsible for defending Rome? The consuls. So they're the ones who have to levy the army. They once again try and go levy the troops. Once again, the tribunes refuse to let them be levied. And so the Aequi are now left to plunder. Now, we were jumping back into our story. This is a particularly bad year. The Aequi have finished plundering all the Latin land and are now right outside of Rome itself, plundering the lands right around Rome. You can watch them from the wall. You can probably throw a rock and hit one of them. So it's gotten that bad, and the army's still refusing to be levied. Now, it so happened that Titus Quintus Capitolinus, some people speculate that he's Lucius Quintus Cincinnatus' brother, but at least a relative of his, in his 4th consulship, he once again is kind of fed up with what's going on. And there's this army right outside Rome attacking. It's his job to levy the troops, and the troops are being refused to be levied. And so he decides to go gather the assembly together and to go address them together with the tribunes and together with the patricians. And so getting them all together, he starts his big speech. First off, he states how much he regrets having the consulship at such a shameful time in Roman history. He says, had I known that you would be so unwilling to fight that our enemies would be able to come and attack our gates and I wouldn't be able to do anything about it, I would have never taken the position. In fact, I'd rather I would just died of my old age already than be in this position. So it's a very shameful position that you, plebs, are putting me in right now. A position where I'd rather be dead than actually be your consul right now. And he says, you're sitting here refusing to go out and fight the Aequi. Who do you think you're hurting? You're telling yourselves that you're hurting me, the consul. I'm not losing anything here. This is his 4th time being consul. He says, I already have all sorts of great honors. If we go out there and we fight a victory and we win, it doesn't change my honor very much. It's you guys who gain honor from that victory, not me. He says, I'm already pretty wealthy and I have lands far away that I can go to and leave and be about my own business. That land right outside, that's your land. That's your farm. That's your possessions that they're taking. I'm fine. And yet here I am, stuck in a position where I care more about what's going on out there than you. And you guys are the ones who are actually hurt by this. I'm just trying to help you help yourselves, so to speak. He says, the fact that it's come to this shameful of a condition for Rome means that there definitely has been some misconduct on at least one of our parts. It's my job to lead Rome in dealing with the enemies. It's your job to be the army. One of us must be misbehaving right now. He says that if you could think of any way I've misbehaved towards you, bring the charges against me. Fine me. I'll pay the fines. I'll submit to punishment. But if it's you who are misconducting and misbehaving, then I won't allow anyone to punish you for it. If you will simply come fight with me right now, all will be forgiven. No punishment for you. And keeps addressing them, give you some of his speech. In the name of heaven, what would you have? You coveted tribunes of the commons. We, meaning the Senate, he's speaking on behalf of the Senate here, we conceded them for the sake of concord. Ye long for Decemviris. We suffered them to be created. You became weary of Decemviris. We compelled them to resign the office. Your resentment against these same persons, when they became private citizens, still continuing, we suffered men of the highest families of rank to die or go into exile. Even when it was completely illegal, what you plebs were pushing forward to, we suffered it to happen, for the sake of concord in the state. Ye wish again to create tribunes of the commons. We created them. We sent the Pontifex Maximus on the Aventine Hill to actually hold the votes free so that could happen. The Aventine is taken against us. That's where you actually marched your armies against the Senate. Against us, the Sacred Mount is seized. That's the second place that you went when you took your armies. Ye have blockaded the Senate house here and have made the Forum a seat of war. We're constantly fighting here in the Forum rather than fighting outside against the enemy. And filled the prisons with leading men of the state. One of the things they started doing again is going after magistrates as soon as their position expired. And then he goes on to say, what have you even gained from spending all your time in the Forum? from these meetings, never has one of you returned home more increase in substance. Goes on to explain to him, all these tribunes do is they rile you up to fight for some law to be passed, but how has it ever benefited you? Right now, they're convincing you to stand here in the forum and not be levied, and you're losing property. How are you being benefited? Now this is his fourth time being consul. He reminds him, remember when you followed me out in the field, and those victories we won, and all that loot you got, and all those honors you achieved? That's what I did for you as a consul. What have these tribunes, who right now are telling you not to come with me, what have they ever given you? How have you ever benefited? So, he eventually talks them into levying. He promises them, I'll help you win back your property, I'll help you gain honors, just follow me, allow yourself to be levied, and we'll go fight. And so, he does a good job convincing them, and they decide that they'll go fight these guys right outside the gates of Rome. So it works out. So Titus Quintus, he leads the army against the Aequi. He actually, kind of a little bit funny with the battle. So the two armies are lined up. He had his cavalry, rather than protecting the flank, he kind of decided to have his cavalry just break through the middle, and it worked way easier than he expected. And so the cavalry broke through the middle, and then the Roman lines reclosed, or the enemy lines reclosed too fast. So you have Roman cavalry down here. This is Roman cavalry. Here's the Roman infantry. They broke through the enemy lines, and the enemy lines kind of closed up faster than they could do anything about it. And so now the Roman cavalry were right here. The enemy cavalry are kind of right there. And so now their cavalry is kind of stuck between an army to their back and the cavalry here. And so they decide that the only thing they can do is just charge at the cavalry as hard and fast as they can, realizing that if they don't kill all these guys, they're going to get sandwiched and killed. And so in their desperation, they push really hard, killing the cavalry, and when the cavalry start leaving, they keep following them all the way out the field, making sure that they all get killed, knowing that they can't just turn around and fight, otherwise the cavalry will be behind them.
Burning the bridges behind them.
In essence, yeah, they accidentally burned the bridges behind them, didn't mean to. And now we got to keep going forward. Can't turn around. So it was a good idea. It just was too easy. It worked too well. And maybe the enemy was ready for it and kind of just led them through as a trap. I don't know. But that's what ends up happening with the cavalry. On the left wing of the Roman army, so that's over here on our right side, on the left wing, that's where one of the consuls, Agrippa, was. We had Quintus on the other side. Agrippa's over here. The left wing is the wing taking the heaviest losses. And his men are starting to give away ground. And so in an attempt to try and hold him, what he does is he ends up taking the standards from the standard bearers. Remember, it's a big deal to let your standard go down. Huge disgrace for a cohort to let their standard fall or be taken by the enemy. So he's taking it from those guys and just throwing it over the enemy line as far as he can. So that they'll force themselves to fight back and go get back their standard. So that's his tactic, trying to just hold on this side as long as he can, hoping that the other side will win. He's not like he's not going to win this side, but he needs to just hold out as long as he can. He can't let his men rout. So he's just hanging off of your line. So that's what's happening on the left wing. On the right wing, so those guys are chasing the cavalry. Here's the enemy camp. It's somewhere over here. Roman camp somewhere over here. On the right wing, that's where Rome's actually having the most success. And the right wing actually wins pretty easily. Now, Quintus is able to stop his men from going and looting the Roman camp, or the enemy camp. That's normally what you do. As soon as you win, you want to go get your loot. He's able to stop him from doing that and say, no, not till the whole battle's won. We got to keep going and fighting. So, because it could have turned into a disaster for him, losing on this end, and then they could have been entrapped in the camp. So, good reason, or good thing he did. So, he stops them. They go, they help the left wing get victory, and eventually everybody wins. So the cavalry, they ended up just pursuing the cavalry all the way off the field, becoming irrelevant in the fight, and then that's what happened with each of the wings. Rome wins their big victory. They get all the loot that they get, that's been gathering up, return it back to whoever they can return it to. And now, when Quintus shows up at Rome, he refuses to even ask for a triumph. He feels it was disgraceful that a triumph was kind of forced before, and so by refusing to even ask for it, it's his way of recognizing that there was already a triumph celebrated that shouldn't have been celebrated. And so we're not even going to ask for this one, and we're just going to go back to Rome. So that's what he ends up doing with his last consulship. Okay, do we have time for some drama between some Roman allies? Yeah, some time for some drama. All right, so now, kind of ignoring what's going on in Rome for a second and looking at some of Rome's allies. We're looking at the city here of Ardea and the city of Aricia. Now, there's some land, I don't know where the land is supposed to be, but there's some plot of land somewhere that Ardea and Aricia have been fighting over for a very long time. They started out saying, it's mine, no, it's mine, and it came to blows. They've actually been fighting each other. Both sides have now been losing soldiers for many years, over an extended period of time, fighting over some plot of land, trying to figure out whose land it is. Both Roman allies. They say, you know what, this is dumb killing each other over this land. What we're going to agree to is we'll both send ambassadors to Rome to present both of our cases, and whatever Rome decides should happen with the land is what should happen with the land. Make sense so far? So that's exactly what they do. Now, physically, what happens here is ambassadors from both cities show up at the Roman Forum addressing the Roman people to present their sides, and the Roman people are going to vote on how it should happen. So one city presents its side, the other city presents its side, and now the Roman people who are both sides get to speak. Well, there's an old pleb who happened to be present at this discussion, and he wants to talk to the people. Now, initially, the patricians say, no, don't interfere, just let him work it out. But he's eager enough, and one of the tribunes vetoes the patrician letting him speak. So the old man gets to talk. The old man tells him how back in his day, when he was a young buck, they fought a city called Corioli. Now, you remember Coriolanus? He was the one who went and fought against the Volsci and then got exiled from Rome and led the Volsci against Rome. That guy. He got his last name, his honorific name, Coriolanus, for his great victories against Corioli. That's the war we're talking about. So this old man was present at those wars. And he says, when we won that war against Corioli, the land in question was land handed over to Rome in the treaty. And he says, so Roman people, be aware that you are about to give away some of your land. Now the senators, they facepalm, and they get up and they address the people. They say, for the love, please ignore everything he just said. For one, if we were going to make any claim to this land, the appropriate way to do it would be for us to pick some other third party and for us to send ambassadors along with their ambassadors to let some other third party pass judgment on what to do here. Second, it is very disgraceful for someone who was already selected as a judge in dealing with some matter to just take it and say it's mine. Bob and Bill arguing over some piece of land, and you say, oh, don't worry, I'll take it. That's a very disgraceful thing to do. The Roman Senate, hearing both sides, they think that the most just outcome is to give the land to Ardea. They think Ardea has the best claim to the land. They say, we as Romans, we already passed up our claim. It's been how much time and we haven't asserted our claim? We're not justified in just coming and asserting our claim now. So, as Roman Senate, what we advise you do is you give the land to Ardea. They tried to make it very clear that if we take the land ourselves, the loss in reputation is far worse than the small gain in lands that we would get here. And so, with that, the people, seeing reason, decide we'll vote the lands to Rome. Because they don't care as much about Rome's image as the patricians do. Land, kind of close to Rome, that sounds good. Maybe I can get some. So Rome votes the land to themselves. And the Senate is very, 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 very unhappy with that decision. But there's nothing the Senate can do. They cannot overrule the Roman assembly. And so Ardea, who they just heard that the Senate thinks that they should have it, they agree that they should have it, they're particularly outraged. Aricia, they're thinking we would have lost land anyways, apparently. So they're not as hurt over it. Ardea is going to be much more furious over this decision than Aricia. So that's what happens with Ardea and Aricia. And we don't have time to get this next piece, unfortunately. It's too bad, because it's like the end of the conflict of the orders for a little bit. Would you be okay staying like an extra 10 minutes? Okay, if you guys are okay with that, we'll try and get to this last slide. Okay, so that just happened with Ardea. That's kind of a side story, but we'll come back into the story. What's going on back in Rome? Business as usual, people fighting for what they're trying to fight for. What are the tribunes trying to fight for now? Well, 9 of them are really pushing for 2 laws to be passed. One of them is for intermarriage to be legal. Now, intermarriage between patricians and plebs used to be perfectly legal. This was one of the things that the Decemviri added. Remember how the Decemviri had their 10 tables and then 2 tables after? On one of those 2 tables after, they added a law that no patrician should ever marry a pleb. So this is one that the plebs are particularly angry about and they want changed. The other one they want is that we should be able to consider plebeians in voting someone to be a consul. We shouldn't be limited to just patricians. Plebeians should be able to also run for that office. Rome should be a meritocracy. If the best man for the job happens to be a plebeian, why can't we vote for a plebeian? Now remember that the tribunes now have an outlet to push these kinds of laws forward very legally. They can present it to the Comitia Centuriata, and they can just vote. And so there's only one way to get the Comitia Centuriata to not vote. Remember, it's the one organized by Century, by your army, and if your army's not home, it can't vote.
Right.
So we need wars. That's what we need. We need to get the troops out of the city. And so Ardea revolts. Wonder why? And on top of that, there's rumors about the Volsci, the Aequi, and even V, their local Etruscan neighbors, all stirring up trouble. So the patricians are saying, whoa, we got to revolt here, and I heard that there's some naughty stuff going on over here. We need the armies, can't vote on the laws, maybe next time, guys. And the tribunes block the levy. They say, no, not going to work, not this time. Now, one of the consuls, he tries to give a Quintus-like speech to him about how there's enemies at the gate, but the enemies aren't really at the gate. Ardea's revolting, and there's rumors about soldiers out there somewhere. Why can't we just vote on these laws and then levy the troops? And so his speech kind of falls flat. And after he gives his speech, trying to get the assembly to just let themselves be levied and go out there and fight, one of the tribunes of the plebs gets up and he says, it's my turn to address all of you and talk to you patricians. And he's going to talk about each of these laws, and he's going to give them a little lesson in history. He says, first off, it's very clear that all you're doing is trying to levy the troops to subvert the will of the people. We now have this legal outlet to pass a law. We do not need to levy the troops right now. It can easily be put off a couple days if that's what it takes to pass these laws. You're just trying to block the will of the people, and it's obvious. On top of that, let's go through some history. He said, let's go back to the Sabines. Clear back when Romulus and the rape of the Sabine women, and then the Sabines come and fight. Early on, that all happened because Romulus was trying to get intermarriage rights between the other people. Romulus didn't think that patricians could only marry patricians. In fact, he was trying to get whoever he could to marry patricians. It wasn't that sacred of a thing. And when the Sabines came along, the enemies of Rome, and were quickly integrated, what did he do? He mixed them together and they instantly started marrying each other. It wasn't so sacred that they couldn't intermarry that way. He says, you patricians keep going on and on about how Rome is really 2 peoples when it should be 1. How the plebs keep acting like they're the enemies of the patricians and we need to come together and have concord. If you really don't want us to be 2 people and want us to be 1 people, how on earth are we ever going to do that if we can't intermarry? If you try keeping us completely separate. So you accuse us of being the ones who are trying to keep it 2 separate states, but you guys are the ones forcing it to be 2 separate states. You should allow us to intermarry for that reason. And then he goes on to the consulship. Remember that going back to the Roman kingdom, there were the king's powers. Here's the king's powers. The consulship is meant to be just a piece of the king's powers. So if someone was qualified to hold the king's powers, they definitely should be qualified to hold the consul's powers. Let's go over our Roman history. Okay, the first king, okay, that was Romulus. You could say he's a patrician. But then, as soon as the Sabines came together, I can't remember the name of the Sabine king, it was like Titus or something. He was put as a co-king with Romulus. Right there out the door, the second guy to hold the kingship in Roman, not a patrician. Now he shortly died after, and that was just Romulus. But when Romulus died, who was the second king of Rome? You remember Numa?
Yeah,
Does it say that? Yeah.
Numa! And he wasn't even a Roman citizen. He was a Sabine citizen. He was just the best guy they could find for the job. And so he was selected to be king. Now, after Numa, you had Hostilius. Okay, you could argue he was a patrician. You had Ancus Marcius. Okay, you could argue he's a patrician. But the next guy, the first Tarquin, Tarquin Priscus, he was from Tarquinia, an Etruscan town, the son of a Greek trader. He was the one who came to Rome and was very wealthy and just won over the love of the people and became the right-hand man to Ancus Marcius. He says he was selected as king even when Ancus Marcius had sons alive who could take him the kingship. That's how little value was placed on this hereditary business, placed on patrician blood. We went with a foreigner, an Etruscan foreigner. And then after Tarquinius Priscus, it was Servilius, the son of a slave, who was selected to be king. He says, and finally after him, you finally get Tarquin Superbus, King Tarquin, the tyrant, the first time that the kingship was handed from father to son. And look at how that turned out, when you put all this emphasis on blood. And so after that, the consulship comes to power, just a piece of the king's powers. Through all that time, it was determined that anyone could hold the kingship so long as they were qualified. And now you're trying to force the consulship to just be patricians? And on top of that, even Rome's enemies, once they integrate with our society, you often just select some of them to be patricians, although they're more qualified than plebeians who have been fighting the whole time. If you remember Appius Claudius, the first one who came, he was leading an anti-war faction with the Sabines. He started out Sabine. And he was just one of the Sabines saying we should have peace with Rome. The Sabines didn't want that. He took his clan and he came to Rome. A bunch of his clan was accepted just as patricians. And Appius Claudius, the next year, made himself consul. And so he points out, enemies of Rome could be consul within a year, and yet not a plebeian fighting for Rome his entire life? How is this remotely justified? So he's pushing that Rome should go back to being a meritocracy like it was under the kingship. Now, of these two, which would the patricians rather pass? Let's go ahead and marry each other. That should be okay. So they go ahead and they pass a law, or they get rid of the law preventing intermarriage. So not really passing a law, but revoking an old law is what they vote to do. Hoping that that will kind of pacify the plebs and we could put aside this plebeian consulship thing for a while. The plebs say, nope, we're still going to block the levy and not allow ourselves to be levied. And so they have to do something. Now the only way, the only little pigeonhole that these patricians can find for not accepting the plebs is that technically there is a small little bump of power here that wasn't quite a kingship power. And it's that the consul is actually kind of like an honorary augur, certain type of priest. And the augurs actually have to have some certain bloodlines to be an augur. And so the plebs say, okay, let's cut out that power, and we'll just take this piece. And we won't take that little piece. So they end up coming up with a new position called a military tribune. A military tribune is the exact same thing as a consul, without that little bump. So you're not a special augur. And so what is going to happen, so there's going to be about a 40-year period here where we enter, and about half the time they're going to elect consuls who get the bump, and the other half the time they're going to elect military tribunes who don't get the bump. Military tribunes can be anyone. Patricians, or consuls, can only be patricians. Now, how this ends up happening in practice is, since there can only be 2 consuls at a time, notice that one of the problems Rome has is they need to fight on multiple fronts. And sometimes they really just wish that they had a 3rd consul or even a 4th consul.
For a third army.
Yeah, for a 3rd army or a 4th army in the field. Nice to have 3 armies fielded and a consul at home to run things. They've kind of had to keep improvising and coming up with weird ways of doing it. It's a couple of reasons that they had to appoint dictators. It's because both consuls were gone. What do you do? And so what ends up kind of happening in practice is years where we need more than 2 consuls, they're going to elect military tribunes. And years where they can get away with just 2 consuls, they're going to just select 2 consuls. So it's going to be in your more military-heavy years that you get military tribunes, and in your more peacetime years that you get consuls. So there's going to be some back and forth for the next 40 years. After that, it's going to be pretty much going back to just consuls. And soon it will get, in about 80 years from now, there's going to be a law passed that one of the consuls has to be a pleb. And so that's where it's ultimately going. Spoilers. Wait till we get to the Caesar guy. Okay, so anyway, so 444 BC, if I remember right, yep, there it is. 444 BC is the very first year that they do elect military tribunes. And patricians can run for the office, and plebs can run for the office. Now, it just so happened that in the first 3 years, all 3 people elected were patricians, but the plebs were very happy about it because they were able to run for the office. Just opening the vote up to them very much made them happy with the situation and very willing to be levied and go fight hard. And so 3 were elected, which was fortunate because they had to deal with 3 armies, the Volsci, the Aequi, and V. Notice that V, they kind of, we haven't heard about them for a while. They kind of been minding their own business. They're going to start causing a lot more problems for Rome. V's been growing this whole time, and they need to start extending their power down southwards, and so we're about to get a big showdown between Rome and V. I won't tell you who's going to win. You'll have to find out. There's a reason that we call it the Great Venetian Empire.
Stay tuned.
Okay, now they have the 3 military tribunes elected. They go, they take the 3 armies, they go win their individual fights, they come back to Rome, la-di-da. But there was a problem in the way that they were elected. Something, the auspices weren't right. Some bad omens were going on that the augurs didn't feel good about. And so shortly after that, when they come back to the city, they re-elect just 2 consuls.
Nice.
And no one seems to have an issue with that because
Bad omens.
we don't question the augurs. A lot of what I've been cutting out of the history is a bunch of the more religious side of Rome, just because there's way too much to get into. But when the bad omens come along, you don't question the bad omens.
It sounds like they would have a lot of power to manipulate the people as well.
Yes, it's kind of strange how little the religious powers are abused for how powerful they are. Okay, so that kind of gives us a good breaking point with the conflict of the order. So we're going to see the conflict of the orders kind of stabilize, and we're going to be focusing next largely on their war with V coming up. Okay, any questions you want recorded? Sorry for going a little bit late. Okay, hope to see you guys next time.
Are you doing class next week?
Maybe, if I can get my presentation prepared fast enough.